I have a good life. That's what I told myself every morning when I made my coffee. 2 sugars, no cream, and stood at the kitchen window watching the birds at the feeder my late husband had nailed to the oak tree 23 years ago. I had my health, my routines, my little house on Cartwright Lane, with a leaky faucet in the hall bathroom that I'd been meaning to fix since April. I had enough. I knew I had enough. What I didn't have was a reason to doubt my own son. That came later. His name is Victor, 41 years old, broad-shouldered like his father, with the same habit of rubbing the back of his neck when he's uncomfortable. I noticed that habit when he was 8 years old and knocked a baseball through the Hendersons' window. He stood there rubbing the back of his neck while I wrote the check. He was doing the same thing the night he sat across from me at my kitchen table and told me he needed me to co-sign a business loan. $50,000. As I set down my coffee cup, I didn't say anything right away. I've learned, over 68 years, that the first thing that comes out of your mouth in a moment like that is rarely the right thing. "It's a sure thing, Mom," he said. "The numbers are solid. My business partner has already committed his half. I just need someone with a stronger credit history to get the bank comfortable." "What about your wife?" I asked. He looked at the table. "Her score took a hit when we refinanced the house." I nodded slowly. I knew about the refinance. I also knew it had happened because they'd pulled equity out to pay off her car in what Victor once referred to, in a rare moment of candor, as some credit card stuff from a few years back. "What's the business?" I asked. He brightened then. He pulled out his phone and showed me a presentation, actual slides, professional looking, with pie charts and projected revenue. A landscaping and outdoor renovation company. He'd been working in construction management for 15 years. He knew the trades. The plan wasn't unreasonable. That was the hardest part. It wasn't unreasonable. "I'll think about it," I said. He left that night looking hopeful. I washed my cup and turned off the kitchen light and sat in the dark living room for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. The oak tree outside moved in the wind. I could hear the bird feeder tapping against the bark. My husband, his name was Francis, and he died 4 years ago this coming November, had left me in a careful position, not wealthy, but stable. A paid-off house, a modest investment account, and a small pension from his years at the electric company. He'd been deliberate about it. He used to say, "The goal is that you never have to ask anyone for anything." He meant it kindly. He'd seen what happened to his own mother when she ran out of money and had nowhere to go. I thought about Francis a lot that week. I called my younger daughter, her name is Noreen, she lives in Phoenix, and I told her what Victor had asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Mom," she said finally, "don't. He has a real plan, Noreen. He always has a real plan." She wasn't wrong. Victor had had a real plan when he invested in a friend's restaurant that closed after 14 months. He'd had a real plan when he bought a rental property that sat vacant for nearly a year. He was a good man with genuine enthusiasm and a track record that gave me pause. But he was my son. I went back and forth for 10 days. I talked to my financial advisor, a serious woman named, well, I'll call her my advisor, because what matters is what she said, not her name. She spread my accounts across her desk and looked at me over her reading glasses. "If he defaults," she said, "the bank comes to you. I know that. Your house is not at risk because it's paid off and would have to go through a longer process. But your investment account, if they got a judgment, yes, that would be at risk. How likely is default? For a new small business in the first 2 years?" She took off her glasses. "The statistics aren't comforting." I drove home with the radio off. I'd like to say the decision was easy. I'd like to say I had a moment of clarity sitting under a beam of light somewhere, but the truth is it was just slow, quiet arithmetic. $50,000, my retirement account, Francis's years at the electric company converted into numbers on a page. My ability, at 68, to recover if something went wrong. I said no. I called Victor on a Tuesday evening. I told him I loved him, and I told him I couldn't do it. I explained the risk. I explained my advisor's concerns. I told him I believed in him and I hoped he'd find another way. He was quiet for a long time. "Okay, Mom," he said. "I understand." And I believed him. I actually believed him. The call that changed everything didn't come from Victor. It came from his wife. Her name is Sabrina, and she and I have always had a relationship best described as polite. She remembered my birthday. I remembered hers. We hugged at Christmas and complimented each other's food. There was no open conflict, no old wound. Just a particular quality of distance that both of us maintained by unspoken agreement. She called me the next morning at 8:45. I was still in my robe. "I just want to understand something," she said. Her voice had a careful, controlled quality, like she'd rehearsed. "You have the money." Victor showed me the accounts. I felt something cold move through me. "I'm sorry?" He was trying to explain the situation to me last night, and he showed me what you have in your investment account. So I understand you have the money. What I'm trying to understand is why you'd rather let it sit in a bank account than help your own son build something. I didn't say anything. We've been there for you, she continued. When Francis passed, who drove 6 hours to be with you? Who stayed for a week? Who? Sabrina, I said quietly. Those things were done out of love, not as a ledger. Well, maybe someone needs to start keeping a ledger. I sat down in the kitchen chair. The bird feeder was tapping against the oak tree. I've made my decision, I said. I'm sorry it's not the one you were hoping for. She hung up. I held the phone in my lap and thought about what it means to love someone and to still tell them no. I thought about my own parents and how my father had co-signed a loan for his brother, and how for 2 years after the default, my father had come home from work with his jaw tight and my mother had learned to be very quiet at dinner. I was 12. I remembered every bit of it. I put the phone on the charger and went to get dressed. Victor called that afternoon. His voice was different than it had been the night before. Flatter, more careful. I heard you talk to Sabrina, he said. She called me. She's upset. I understand that. Mom. He paused. We were thinking, and you don't have to decide right now, but there's a room here, the back bedroom. We were thinking, eventually, when the house on Cartwright gets to be too much. Victor, I'm 68. The house isn't too much. I know. I'm just saying. The offer's there. Or I guess what Sabrina said is, the offer was there. I heard what he meant. I was supposed to hear it. The offer was there, and now it might not be, contingent on a decision I'd made about my own money and my own financial security. I said, I appreciate that. I do. But when I hung up, I sat very still in my kitchen and felt something I hadn't expected. Not hurt, not anger. Something quieter and more clarifying, like the moment after a fever breaks and you can suddenly think straight again. The months that followed were ordinary on the surface. Victor and I still talked. He found a co-signer through his business partner's father-in-law, someone I never met. The company launched. I followed along from a distance, the way you follow news from a place you used to live. Interested, but no longer responsible for the weather there. Sabrina and I were more distant than before, not hostile, just honest, in a way that polish had previously obscured. Christmas was fine, New Year's was fine. What wasn't fine, what I didn't talk about to anyone for a while, was the back bedroom comment. It had lodged itself somewhere I couldn't quite reach. Because underneath it was a question I'd been avoiding for 4 years, since Francis died and I was suddenly living alone in a house that, most of the time, felt like exactly the right size and occasionally felt very large indeed. What was I going to do? Not next year, not in 10 years, but eventually. I started paying attention to things I'd been deferring. The leaky faucet, the gutter along the north side that sagged after the storm last September, the furnace that a technician had described, at my last inspection, as still functional but getting long in the tooth. I started making lists. I started calling contractors. And somewhere in all of that practical motion, I started to feel something unexpected. I started to feel better. There is something about making your own repairs, or at least making the calls to have your own repairs made, that restores something. I don't know what else to call it. Dignity sounds too dramatic. Agency is a word I normally associate with government, bureaucracy. But it was something in that neighborhood. I was taking care of my own house. I was not waiting for someone to do it for me, and I was not beholden to anyone for the privilege. The faucet got fixed. The gutter got fixed. In the spring, I had the furnace replaced. In April, something else happened. I was going through the drawer of Francis's old desk. I'd been avoiding it for 4 years, which tells you everything about grief and how long it takes to move through things at your own pace. And I found a folder labeled, in his handwriting, for Dot. My name is Dorothy. He was the only one who ever called me Dot. I sat down on the floor right there, in front of the open desk drawer, and held the folder for a moment before I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten, 4 pages. And behind the letter, documentation for a small account I had not known existed, an account he'd opened 11 years ago and contributed to quietly over the years, separate from our joint finances, a thing he'd kept to himself with characteristic patience and care. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to matter. The letter started. Dot, if you're reading this, it's because I didn't get the chance to walk you through it myself. Don't be angry with me for keeping it separate. You'll understand why when you get to page 3. I read all 4 pages twice. On page 3, he explained that he'd set the account aside specifically because he'd wanted me to have something that was entirely mine. Not ours, not the house, not the joint account, not anything tied to decisions we'd made together. Something I could use or not use entirely on my own terms. I know you, Dot, he wrote. You'll want options. This is me giving you options. I sat on the floor of the study for a long time. I thought about the phone call with Sabrina. I thought about the back bedroom that was offered and then not offered. I thought about what it means to be 68 years old and have people you love, people you have fed and worried over and driven to emergency rooms and held when they cried, begin to quietly arrange your future on their behalf. I thought about my neighbor across the street, a woman in her mid-70s who'd moved in with her daughter 3 years ago and who, whenever I see her now, has a particular expression on her face. Not unhappy exactly, but waiting. Like she's always waiting for permission to leave a room. I did not want that expression. I called a realtor the following week. Not to sell the house. I wasn't ready for that, and the market wasn't right anyway. But I wanted information. I wanted to know what my options looked like, concretely, not theoretically. I wanted numbers I could put next to other numbers and compare. The realtor was thorough and honest. She walked through the house with me and pointed out what would increase value and what wouldn't matter. She gave me a range. She gave me information about the newer independent living community that had opened about 4 miles north. Not a nursing facility. She was careful to clarify, but a community of detached cottages and small homes designed for people who wanted their own space without the maintenance burden of a full-sized house. I drove out there on a Wednesday afternoon, just to look. The cottages had their own small porches. There were raised garden beds along the common path. The community had a library room with actual books in it, and a weekly gathering that a cheerful woman at the welcome desk described as optional, which we mean sincerely. I liked the optional. I took a brochure and drove home. I didn't call Victor about it. I didn't call Noreen. I sat with the brochure on my kitchen table for 2 weeks, looking at it sometimes and sometimes not. I made my coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, and stood at the window and watched the birds at the feeder Francis had put up 23 years ago. I thought about the difference between staying somewhere because you want to and staying somewhere because you don't know what else to do. I thought about the fact that Francis had known me well enough to leave me something I didn't know I needed until I needed it. I thought about the back bedroom. I called Victor on a Sunday evening in May. He answered on the second ring the way he always does, and his voice was warm in the way it gets when enough time has passed after a conflict and we're both choosing not to carry it anymore. Hey, Mom. Hey, sweetheart. We talked for a while about ordinary things. His youngest had learned to ride a bike without training wheels. There was a problem with one of their sprinklers. Sabrina was thinking about going back to work part-time. Then I said, I want to tell you something. He went quiet in that particular way of his, the way that means he's preparing himself. I'm going to start making some changes, I said. To the house and probably eventually to where I live. I'm looking at some options. What kind of options? I told him about the cottage community. I told him that I liked the idea of a smaller space with a porch and less maintenance and a library room where no one would make me talk if I didn't want to. Mom, he said carefully, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, I said. That's why I want to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Are you okay? And I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the folder in the desk drawer and the 4 pages in Francis's handwriting and the account that had been sitting quietly for 11 years waiting for me to need it. I thought about the bird feeder tapping against the oak tree and the fixed faucet and the new furnace humming efficiently in the basement. I'm better than okay, I said. I think I'm finally doing exactly what I should be doing. He didn't fully understand. Okay, Mom, I'm glad. And that was enough. I'm writing this from the kitchen table on Cartwright Lane, where I still live for now. The house is in better shape than it's been in years. The birds are at the feeder. The oak tree is full and green in early summer, the way it gets, and the light comes through the window at this hour, in a way that always made Francis say it looked like a painting. I've been thinking about what it means to be asked to risk your security for someone you love. I've been thinking about the difference between generosity and obligation, and how sometimes people around us blur that line without realizing they're doing it, and sometimes knowing full well. I've been thinking about my mother-in-law, and what Francis saw when he was young, and why he sat down 11 years ago and opened an account, and wrote 4 pages in his careful handwriting, and put them in a folder marked 4. He knew something that took me longer to learn. Your stability is not selfishness. Your security is not something you owe other people in exchange for being loved. The people who love you correctly will understand your no, and the people who use your yes as the price of their warmth, well, you learned something important about them too. I have a good life. I knew it before, and I know it now, but the knowing is different. It's not the brittle optimism of someone talking herself into contentment. It's the solid, held knowledge of a woman who looked at what she had, looked at what was being asked of her, and chose herself. Not instead of her family. Not in spite of loving them. Just first, that's all. Just first. The coffee's still warm. The birds are still there. And for the first time in a long time, when I stand at this window in the morning, I'm not bracing for anything, I'm just here. Quietly, entirely here.